365.
X.
All right, we're here at the SharePoint conference with Fabian Williams. And we're gonna talk tech stuff, but we try to explain stuff in plain English.
Got it.
Fabian, tell me a bit about yourself. What are you doing?
So my name is Fabian Williams. I'm a SharePoint, I did it again. I am a Office Server and Services MVP and a Visual Studio MVP. I work for a company called Witham Digital, which is based in the DC metro area. And my role there is I lead a practice for intelligent process automation. And intelligent process automation is all about workflows or processes, but it looks at it from a couple different angles. So you have traditional business process management and business process automation, and then you now have machine learning and artificial intelligence, which brings another role into that for like things like RPA, robotics process automation.
Yeah.
And you can leverage a lot of technologies both from the Microsoft stack and others in order to do that.
We might even shortly discuss robotic process automation.
Sure.
It's a very hyped term about last year, and there's many people who have no clue what it is. So
Right.
we might
Happy
actually
to talk about it.
But the key thing that the mission that we have for this video is explain to business analysts, power users, people who are using like Microsoft Power Apps and Flow and the Power Platform, or are using PowerShell to provision like site designs in SharePoint, to give a little bit better understanding about what's happening like on the Azure Functions side. What are the key things you have to consider? And our mission is to try to have Fabian here to explain a little bit more about what's happening on the back end and what is serverless and Azure Functions.
Sure, absolutely. So you hit on two terms right there. So Azure Function and serverless, plays hand in hand. So Azure Function is Microsoft's offering. It's a cloud offering to allow you to build processes in the server with servers abstracted. What do we mean by abstract is that in a traditional model, developers, when they want to work, they would have to spin up a server or spin up a workstation and need to install Visual Studio or whatever their design environment is, and then load libraries and then go to town. There's a lot of work up front in order to start working. With Azure Functions, the idea is that within the portal, you can go directly in and start to create functions, right? And what are functions? Functions, it takes input parameters, it does something, and could provide out parameters. So it's very modular in that sense. So Azure Functions give you the ability to be microservices approach or a solution-oriented architecture approach, break things out into its constituent pieces, and then basically do input and output. So that's basically it. And it's done in the cloud, so that's why it's called serverless. The servers are still there, but you're not running those servers. It's just a platform available to you to code.
Yeah, and one of the terms also is like event-driven,
Yes.
like you call a service, something happens, you get it back, and then it's done. There's no state.
Right. Well, there is state. In today's term in Azure Functions, one of the challenges in version 1 or in the older version was that it was stateless, which is a good thing because you do want stateless transaction because it's easy. It's transactional. You throw something over the fence, wait for something to come back. Hence the event driven. But in today's technology, you do want to maintain some state, especially if you're doing multifaceted operations or parallel tasks. You want to have continuity there so that each item can know what's going on. So you have something now called durable functions, which is basically stateful Azure Functions.
Cool.
Exactly. But the event-driven piece of it, you touched on it, is a very good topic. So a good use case would be like in traditional SharePoint land where people wanted to do some operations behind the scene, like a maintenance or utility to do timer jobs.
Yeah.
So in SharePoint Online, what's the solution for that? There's not really any.
Nope.
But with Azure Functions, you can create a scheduled task that runs over X time, which is 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 1 day, whatever, and you can have that hit against SharePoint Online, thus now having a timer job solution. But that's only one part of the event triggers that are there. You have event triggers like HTTP, which is just like when you go to a web browser and you click a button, that's an HTTP call. That's event driven because you're doing something, right? So there's that. There's queues where you can just drop things in and then it just stacks up and then it just comes off the stack. There's like databases, so you can have something in like Azure SQL database or Cosmos DB database when an item is inserted in the database. That's a trigger. So you have all of these items out there.
Yeah, so that's how you create the state by putting things in the database or putting things in a queue. And are you then using Azure Azure queues, or where do you what do you use for the queuing?
Right, there's a queue service within Azure as an entity that you can play with. So it is like MSMQ, if you remember that good stuff, right? So it's the same queuing service, except it's being done like an Azure web job, technology. So that's there, and that's the queuing system.
Still, my favorite way in looking at this complex scenario is looking at Starbucks as an example, getting your coffee. So it's like you have like two worker roles, like the two people behind the desks. And you place your order, you get your name on it, which is your tag, and basically that's the queue, right? Like I want an Americano medium, and with my name on it, and that's the queue, and then it's being processed, which is the Azure function doing the work in the back end, making my coffee as prescribed in the queue. And then the output would be my coffee
in your sleeve, ready for you, and you're out the door.
Yeah,
exactly. And that's a good real world example. I'm actually steal that from you as I start to explain these topics. But yeah, that's the idea. It should be, and for you, it's simple. The process is streamlined. That's what I want to say. And in the end, you really don't care how it happens. When you did this, and then at the end you're gonna do that and get your coffee, which is exactly how Azure Functions work. I throw something in the pot. And it could be going to 1 queue, 2 queue, 3 queues. It could be on stable store. But in the end, I get an output that's meaningful. In fact, in one of the examples that I did in my demo here, because I did a session on Azure Functions, I basically took a photograph of a business card. And with a business card, the complexity there is that none of them are the same, right? Even within a company, somebody may have a PhD, somebody may have an MBA, and that's something unique on the business card, even though it looks the same. Or somebody may have, a phone number that's a different area code from another one. So there's no consistency. And what I'm trying to do with that solution is take a photograph, regardless of the business card, and then use Azure Cognitive Services in Azure Function, because I can call Azure Cognitive Services from Azure Function, read it in, get all of that information, and then put it out. And here's my output. So it's in a queue. It's going to Salesforce, MailChimp. It's going to a new contact in Office 365. It's going to Dynamics. And it's sending the person email with my VCF as well, so they can just put it in there. And that's one Azure function call that's spitting out 5 different outputs.
That's extremely cool. Yeah. And I always ask the people here, like, what's your favorite use case that provides like extreme amount of business value? Right. But this is an amazing example. Yeah. So basically, you say you have a service that you could use like the Flow app, or even like you could use like the OneDrive app to snap a photo, store it in a SharePoint document library, then trigger a flow which calls a function. Yeah. And then you have Azure Cognitive Services reading the data from the card, and then sending all the contact information to different services.
Exactly right. But in Azure Functions world, and I love the way that you did it with Flow and you put SharePoint inside there. But so I'm abstracting it at a lower level. So Azure Function also has something called storage, blob storage. So that's where you're going to drop that picture, and it's going to stay there, and then it's going to run through the engines, and then it's going to spit it out into these other areas. But you mentioned something interesting as well. So Azure Functions gives you a URL endpoint that you can work with it. So in that aspect, it's a RESTful endpoint. Microsoft Flow can take the input of an Azure function and work with it. So basically, from Flow, you could call Azure function and get a return value back in. So the two of them, work well with each other, depending on just what side of the fence you are. Are you a coder or you're not a coder? Do you want to code or not code? And that could bring us into the conversation around Flow and also Logic Apps as well. Yeah.
So if there are different layers, there are different ways in this example where you could store the image. It could be Azure Blob Storage. It could be a SharePoint document library. And if you're storing it in Azure, you could call basically the Azure function and let that be the trigger of the process. But you could also have a flow being triggered in the SharePoint document library and then kickstart the process.
Indeed. And it could have more than one, right? It could be many roads leading to the same thing. You could have a person with a mobile application, and because they're in a mobile app, they're using Azure Function. But you could have somebody in a desktop, and they're working with emails, and they basically just take the email and put it inside the library, and boom, the same thing. It doesn't really matter how you get there, as long as you get there.
Yeah. So, and I think that the very important distinction here between the workflow that we normally worked with, it normally was like a small business process. Right. It's like I create something like an expense form, and then somebody has to approve it, and when it's approved, it's getting sent to finance, and then it's processed. And that's a business process. But with Azure Functions, and even the way that Microsoft is positioning Flow, it's like a task automation.
Yes.
And that's a piece of
It's
a process.
It's a minute, discrete part of an overall process.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think Microsoft is doing a fantastic thing there. They're basically decoupling things and allowing you to take more ownership at a lower level, because they want to give you the tools in order to make your business work, but they don't really know your business. You know your business. So as long as I give you the tooling, and now I can give you in discrete layers, you can make it work for you extremely effective in this place we are now, where technology like Microsoft Teams is building in chat, is building in collaboration, is building in this. They're just pushing all of that stuff to you and saying, make it work for you.
Yeah. Amazing technology.
Yeah.
Fabian, thank you for explaining it with us.
Yeah.
Great stuff.
Yeah.
Love to have you again, and
sure.
enjoy the rest of the
Always
day.
good, man. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Cheers.